This video covers Artifact 1, which includes Standards 1.1, ITSD Criterion 2, and Standard 4.2, ITSD Criterion 13. For Standard 1.1, I had to set professional learning goals. My first goal was to learn to use 3 or more digital tools that I could utilize when presenting academic content to my students. I not only wanted to know how to use these tools, but also wanted to find out which tools and formats were best when presenting different kinds of information in a meaningful way. My second goal was to be a co-learner, learning alongside my students and allowing them more autonomy and decision-making abilities in their learning. My first goal was to learn to use 3 or more digital tools and figure out which tool is the best format for delivering different types of information in easily consumable ways. The 3 tools I focused on mastering were Google Slides, Canva, and Kaggle. However, I also had to learn the basic uses for various other digital tools to help my students navigate the uses of those tools and to help them find resources for their effective uses. Also, several of my students taught me how to use some of these tools in ways I didn't even know were possible. Here are some examples of instructables I created for my students to reference as exemplars for our project-based learning assignment. I used Canva to create a poster covering simple topics that I always get asked the most about when my class transitions from using GarageBand to Logic Pro. I created a mind map with Kaggle on the various features that GarageBand has and the features that Logic Pro has. And I created a Google Slides about the features that are available in Logic Pro that were not available in GarageBand. My second goal was to be a co-learner with my students, allowing them to lead their own learning by choosing the method to demonstrate their depth of understanding of both Logic Pro and GarageBand. This second goal is particularly difficult for me because I really like having my class planned out. I am most comfortable when I have full control over my class's curriculum. But I felt that to grow as an educator and to empower my students' learning, this was an important goal for me to attempt. Here are some examples of digital tools that my students engage with to create artifacts or that I engage with to create artifacts. As you have already seen, at the bottom is a mind map I created with Kaggle to give my students a visual reference to the fact that GarageBand and Logic Pro are very similar, but that Logic Pro has more features. Top center is the poster I created for my class using Canva on basic tasks in Logic Pro. On the right is the criteria for our project-based learning assignment. One of my students showed me how I could create a checklist using Google Docs that I didn't know was possible. And since each student was choosing a different medium for their project, this was a very useful tool for my students to make sure they hit every criteria. On the left is a screenshot from a web page of one of my students that he made using Google Sites. He had never made a website before, and I had never used Google Sites before. So there was a lot of learning for the both of us as I helped him navigate how to use this digital tool. Standard 4.2, ITSD Criterion 13, challenged me to learn a new digital tool alongside my students. The tool my students and I chose to engage with was Google Sites. They would use Google Sites to create a website for new users to the digital audio workstation known as Logic Pro X. They must include text and pictures. Videos were not required but were heavily recommended. As an introduction to the project, the whole class watched a Google Site tutorial together that covered the basics of how to lay out a Google web page. You can see the video tutorial here. Then we all created a new site that we used as a playground to test some of the basic features we had just learned about. During that time, I encouraged students to explore more online resources about how to make a Google website. I looked up several web pages that had a lot of useful information about some more advanced features of Google Sites. My students continued to search YouTube for more video tutorials. Then we all came back together to discuss in groups what we had learned and to show off some of the things that we were able to create on our experimental web pages. By the end of class that day, we weren't experts, but most had a pretty good handle on a lot of the basic features of Google Sites. Here are some examples of our final products we completed over the next few weeks. There weren't a lot of challenges. Google Sites is pretty user-friendly. I created multiple pages, each covering different features of Logic Pro, and I had a little trouble getting my pages to link together, but with a little trial and error, I was finally able to get them all to link correctly. One of my students ran into an issue with our walled garden. Because the students created these sites on their student accounts, one had to be logged into the Gwinnett County Public Schools portal to view the website. We tried to Google search a solution, but we couldn't find an answer. I even asked my school's TST, and she couldn't find a workaround either. So in the future, when we do this project again, I'll allow my students to use their personal Google accounts to complete this project if they'd like to. That way, I'd still be able to view it and grade it, but they could post it and share it with whomever they'd like.